fifth graders, it's Mrs. Tremblay, and today we're going to do math lesson number 1. So you're going to need your math unit 2 packet, adding and subtracting with decimals. And right here I have a place value chart. We're going to refer back to that shortly, but for now we're going to start right down here. So just like in class, what I write, I want you to write. I don't want you to try to do all these problems on your own. I actually want you to solve them with me like we would do in class. So your answers should match my answers. Anything that I write on here, you should write down on there. Okay, so our first lesson is writing decimals from tenths, hundredths, and thousandths. And the first thing we're gonna look at is hundredths. It says, show all the different ways you can write 65 cents. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. I know you're thinking, we learned this a long time ago. But the basic way is just 65 cents, right? You can also do that word form. That is one way. You can just write it. You can also, if you wanted to write it with a dollar sign, we have $0. So it'll be 0.65. This also represents 65 cents. And there's another way you can actually write it. So when you have 65 cents, if you think about how many cents there are in a dollar, it takes 100 pennies to make a dollar, right? It takes 100 cents. So if you have 65 cents, that means you have 65 out of 100. So that's another way you can write 65 cents, and this is said as 65 hundredths. Now, if you look up here at this place value chart, I just said 65 hundredths. There's the word hundredths right here. So we have our decimal point, and then we have tenths, and we have hundredths. When you see this 0.65, that's the same thing as putting a 6 and a 5 right here. And this would be read as 65 hundredths. So to read these, whatever place the last digit to the right is in, that's how you say it. So I have the number 65, and I would say 65 hundredths because that last digit is in the hundredths place. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that this chapter. Okay, so the first thing we want to be able to do is to write each amount of money as a fraction and a decimal. So we're going to relate what we did before, writing these things as fractions and then converting that into a decimal. So if you have 32 cents, to write that as a fraction, when you have 32 cents, you don't have one whole dollar, right? You have 32 out of 100 cents. 100 100ths would mean you'd have a whole dollar. So 32 hundredths as a decimal would be 0.32 because that 2 would be in a hundredths place. So 32 hundredths is the same as 0.32. And you can write it like this, or sometimes you see it like this with the 0 in front of that decimal point. That's the ones place. The first one to the left of the decimal point is your ones place, and if you have 32 cents, you don't have any dollars, you don't have any ones, so you can put a 0 there to represent it. Again, if you have it, it's still right. If you don't, it's right. Most of the time, you'll see it written like that. All right, down here I have 99 cents. That would mean you have 99 out of 100 because we have less than a dollar. And as a decimal, if you have 99 out of 100, this is like 99 hundredths. Right? So I would write 99 with the 9 in the hundredths place. Okay, here we have 8 cents. That means 8 out of 100, so that would be the fraction for it. And again, we're writing it like this because 100 out of 100 means you would have a whole dollar because you'd have all 100 cents. This one can kind of trip people up sometimes. I know I have 0 ones, but if I have 8 hundredths, that means I need the 8 to be in the hundredths place. And the hundredths place is 2 places to the right of the decimal point. That's why I drew 2 little lines here. So I know that 8 needs to go here. And if you have 8 hundredths, that means I don't have any tenths. And think about that. If you think about tenths in terms of money, isn't 1/10 a dime? Yeah. 1 dime is worth 10 cents. So if you have 8 cents, you don't have any dimes. You could have a nickel and 3 pennies, or you could just have 8 pennies. But you would have 0 dimes, and the dimes are the tenths. So you'd put a 0 in that place, and this would be read as 8 hundredths because the 8 is in the hundredths place. All right, here I have 1 cent. That means I have 1 out of 100. And the same thing here. I can put my 0 in the ones place. If I have 1/100th, I need to put my 1 in the hundredths place. All right, if you have 10 cents, that means you have 10 out of 100. And I have 0 ones, and I would have 10 hundredths. So I put my final digit in the hundredths place. We're gonna end up talking a lot about this eventually. There's another way you could write that, but for now, this is perfectly fine. All right, here I have 50 cents. So that means I have 50 out of 100 cents to make that whole dollar. And that means I would need to have 50 with my 0 in the hundredths place. So if it's out of 100, that's the same thing as having hundredths. Your final digit needs to be in the hundredths place. All right, hopefully so far so good. Turn your page. This next section says representing tenths. So instead of just giving you money, if I'm representing tenths, this is not out of 100 anymore because it's not a dollar. So I used a candy bar instead. I figured we could all relate. This candy bar has been cut up into 10 pieces. This says to write a fraction that represents 1 piece. So write a fraction that represents 1 piece, and then we're gonna write the decimal after that. So kind of just what we did with the hundredths, going from fraction to decimal, but this time it's representing tenths. So right now, this is 1 whole candy bar. The candy bar has been cut up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces. If you have 1 piece, you don't have 1 whole candy bar. You have 1 out of 10 pieces. So I can say 1 out of 10. Another way to properly say this is 1/10. And if you look back at the front, the tenths place is the first one to the right of the decimal point. So if we're saying we have 1/10, then as a decimal, I would want to put my 1 in the tenths place. And I don't have 1/10, I have 1/10. If I have 1/10, then I actually have like 10. A tenth means I don't have the whole thing. Okay, write the fraction to represent 3 pieces. So if you have 3 of these pieces, that means you have 3 out of 10, or I would say 3/10. And if I have 3/10, that means I need my 3 to be in the tenths place. Finally, if you have 5 pieces, that means you have 5/10. And 5/10 as a decimal would be a 5 in the tenths place. Maybe you're noticing, well, hey, wait a minute, 5/10, that's the same as a half. Yep, 5/10 is equal to 1/2, but the decimal for 1/2 is 0.5 because 5 needs to be in the tenths place. I have 5 out of 10. So whenever you're using the place value system, these are gonna be multiples of 10. Okay. Time for for thousandths. So we did the hundredths. I started with hundredths because I thought money was the most relatable thing. And then we did our tenths using a candy bar. And we're gonna represent thousandths using batting averages. So some of us will be able to relate, some of us might not, but after this, you'll learn a little something about baseball. I'm always learning a little something about baseball. My son loves it. Okay, so the thousandths place is the third one to the right of the decimal point. So here's the decimal point. The first place is the tenths. The second place would be the hundredths. The third place is the thousandths. So this means my denominator in a fraction would be 1,000 because you have something out of 1,000. And that means that if I'm writing it as a decimal, that my last digit needs to be in the thousandths place because that's how you read it. So here we go. Miguel Cabrera. He has 250 hits out of 1,000. A baseball player's batting average is given as how many hits they would be expected to get out of 1,000. Okay, so if you say you're batting 1,000, that means you're really good. Okay, so 250 out of 1,000 as a fraction would look like this. I have my 250 out of 1,000. Now to say this properly, I would say 250 thousandths. I don't have 250,000. That's way different. So don't forget the th at the end. It's not thousands, it's thousandths. That lets me know that it's not a whole number to the left of the decimal point. So if you have 250 thousandths, that means that I have 0 ones because I'd need 1,000 over 1,000 to be one whole. And for 250, this first digit, if I just wrote it just like it is now, it would be tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So I can go right ahead and write this just like that. Because this 0 is in the thousandths place, this would be read 250 thousandths. So it matches. All right, Willie Castro, 347 hits out of 1,000. So as a fraction, that would be 347 out of 1,000. Yes, that's less than 1. So I have 0 ones. And if I just write the 347 the way it is, it works because this 7 is in the thousandths place. So I would read this as 347 thousandths. All right, Jacoby Jones, 268 hits out of 1,000. So I have 268 thousandths. That would be written as, I have 0 ones and 268. I can write it just like that because that 8 is already in the thousandths place. All right, time to do a little bit of application with this. This is the last page. Okay, so this says, write each as a decimal. Now, if you wanted to for this, I don't mind if you try these problems. So I would be okay if you paused the video and tried some of these right now, as long as you promise to come back and check your work. Your answers should match mine. When you come to class and I ask you to show me this, your answers should match this video, okay? So again, you can feel free to press pause, try these on your own, that would be great, but just make sure that after you finish, you press play and check your work. Okay, so if you have 42 over 100, I would say this as 42 hundredths. Now remember, the hundredths place is the second one over, right? So if you look at your place value chart, the hundredths, that means 2 places to the right of the decimal. So that means that I would need that 2 to be 2 places to the right of the decimal point. It's kind of like however many zeros are after that 1, that's where it should be. So this would be 42 hundredths. Here I have 28 hundredths. So that's less than 1, so it's going to be 0. And then I can just go ahead and write 28 because this 8 is in the hundredths place. For 7 hundredths, I can't just write 0.7 because the first place to the right of the decimal point is the tenths place. So if I wrote a 7 right here, I would say 7 tenths. If I want 7 hundredths, that means I need to put the 7 into the hundredths place. And if I have 7 hundredths, I don't have any tenths. So I'd have 0 tenths. Sorry, tenths. All right, here I have 1/10. That means I need to have a 1 in the tenths place. The tenths place is the first one to the right. If I have 3/10, that means I need a 3 in the tenths place. And if I have 6/10, I would need a 6 in the tenths place. So whatever your denominator is, that tells you what place when we're dealing with hundredths, tenths, and thousandths. All right, the next set, I have thousandths here. So if you have 438 thousandths, I'm gonna put a 0 in the ones place because I don't have any whole numbers. And I just need to make sure that the 8 in 438 is in the thousandths place, and it is. If you have 58 thousandths, I can't just write a 5 and an 8 here. If I did, that 8 would be in the hundredths place. So if I have thousandths, I need my last digit to end up in the thousandths place. So my 8 should go in the thousandths place. That means my 5 is going in the hundredths, and I have 0 in my tenths. So 58 thousandths should be written like that. You can't forget this first 0 to the right of the decimal point. If you do, you would have 58 hundredths instead of 58 thousandths, which is much different. All right, here I have 5 thousandths. So if I have 5 thousandths, I have 0 ones. I need my 5 to be in the thousandths place. The thousandths place is tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 3 over. So I want my 5 to be there. Here, I would have to put my zeros because I don't have any tenths or hundredths. I only have 5 thousandths. All right, so hopefully your answers match mine. If not, you should have fixed them up so that they do. All right, last 3. If you cut an orange into 10 equal pieces, what decimal would represent 6 pieces? Okay, so we're gonna take, this is kind of like the candy bar question, except we're taking one whole orange and we're cutting this orange up into 10 pieces. Okay, so this orange is being all cut up. One, there, I think that's 10. But they're gonna be equal, so just pretend that mine are equal. You know, I struggle sometimes with the artwork. Okay, so here's my one orange. It's cut up into 10 pieces. It says, what decimal would represent 6 pieces? I think it helps to think about this as a fraction first, because if you have 6 out of those 10 pieces, that is 6/10. But I didn't ask you for the fraction. I just think that the fraction is going to help us to get the decimal. 6/10 means that I have 6 in the 10ths place. So the decimal that would represent 6 out of 10 pieces would be 6/10. So that first place to the right, that is the 10ths place. All right, a bag of Skittles contains 100 Skittles. What decimal would 8 Skittles represent? So think about this as a fraction first. If the whole bag has 100 in it, 8 out of that 100 would look like this, right? This is read as 8/100ths. As a decimal, sorry, I forgot to circle that one. As a decimal, that means I want 8 in the 100ths place. The 100ths place is 2 over. The first one is 10ths, the second is 100ths. So I would put my 8 right there, and I don't have any 10ths. So this is how I would write it. This would be read as 8/100ths. That means you have 8 out of 100. Last one. An anthill is home to 1,000 ants. If 732 ants are out gathering food, what decimal number is represented by the ants that stayed home? Ooh, okay, so this is a good one here. It says that 732 are out gathering food, and I ask you for the decimal of the ants that stayed home. So you actually have to figure out how many ants stayed home first, because 732 are out. So if there's 1,000 ants total, and 732 are out gathering food, the first thing we need to know is how many stayed home. Well, 732 plus what is 1,000? That's what you could ask yourself. You could also go ahead and say, okay, 1,000 minus 732 to get your answer. Now, I know that you're used to saying, okay, well, I need to borrow, right? So I'm going to borrow from this 1, make it a 0, and this would be 10. Nope, it's 9. This would be 10. Nope, it's 9. This would be 10. And 10 minus 2 is 8. And 9 minus 3 is 6. And 9 minus 7 is 2. So I get 268, okay? Another really cool thing that you can do, if you have to take 1,000 minus 732, whenever you see like a whole bunch of zeros, you can actually just take 1 away from both of these numbers. This is kind of a little trick. And it works with subtraction because subtraction measures the distance between two things. So if you have 1,732 and I want to know how far away that is, it would be the same distance as 999 and 731. So you could actually take 1 away from the 1,000 and 1 away from the 732 because it's the same distance. And then you don't have to do all that borrowing. This only works when you have like, well, it works for every single subtraction problem. 9 minus 1 is 8. 9 minus 3 is 6. 9 minus 7 is 2. So you can see, ooh, you get the same answer. If you're like, I have no idea what you just did, don't worry about it. It's okay. You can still do that. I know a lot of people are very comfortable with that. Or if you want to just use number talk strategies and ask yourself, well, 732 plus what is 268? You can do that as well by counting up by hundreds and then by tens and so on and so forth. Anyhow, to make a long story short, or I think I just made a short story long, the answer that we're looking for here is that 268 ants stayed home, right? 268 out of the 1,000. Now it asks, what decimal is represented by this? So I have 268 thousandths. That means that I need that 8, that last digit, to be in the thousandths place, which is the third one over, and it actually works out nicely because it already is. So 268 thousandths of the ants stayed home. All right, next you're gonna end up working through a workbook page. So you'll end up working through workbook page 48 and you'll be checking that soon. Thanks for listening.